Aaron Vega was born 48 years ago in South Holyoke to an icon of social justice activism, Carlos Vega, a co-founder of Nueva Esperanza, an organization that created affordable housing and related programming in the city. The younger Mr. Vega and his wife Deborah founded a successful yoga studio called Vega Yoga and Movement Arts. He tries to practice every morning. He is also an award-winning filmmaker and film editor of more than a dozen films, and has worked with PBS's famed multi-part series documentarian Ken Burns. Mr. Vega's work has also been presented on TLC and HBO. In 2009, Mr. Vega ran for an at-large city council seat and won. And in 2012, he ran for state representative and won. As the state lawmaker for the 5th Hampden District, which includes all of Holyoke, Mr. Vega has competing priorities. Among the issues he is most passionate about is education. And recently, he penned a column to kickstart his efforts in the state legislature to make school breakfast and lunch free for students. The father of 4 wrote, "Imagine being held back in elementary school, and for reasons beyond your control, and perhaps for reasons you don't fully understand, your lunch is taken from you by cafeteria staff and you are given a cheese sandwich. The food taken from you is literally thrown away, often right in front of you. This practice has been referred to as, quote, food shaming. It happens when a family falls behind on payments for their children's lunch. It is clear those students most affected by this food shaming are already with food insecurity issues and other challenges that come with living in low-income or poverty neighborhoods. 1 in 7 children in Massachusetts lives in a food insecure household. Nearly 300,000 children are eligible for free or reduced price breakfast, but only half are able to participate. Hungry children can't concentrate, suffer cognitive and developmental impairment, and have higher absenteeism," end quote. Today, Mr. Vega is with us in our inaugural show, The Politicos, where journalists have freewheeling conversations with elected leaders. Welcome to The Politicos, where a panel of journalists talk with elected officials about issues and events that shape Holyoke and our region. Today we have Mike Plaisance, a longtime journalist who until recently worked at The Republican, Matt Safransky, founder and editor of Western Mass Politics and Insight, Manuel Frau Ramos, founder and publisher of the bilingual monthly newspaper El Sol Latino, and Michael Ortiz Caraballo, a sophomore here at Holyoke High School. Our guest is State Representative Aaron Vega, who has been representing Holyoke in the legislature since 2013. Today we're focusing on education and government transparency. Welcome, and I'm going to toss the first question to Mike Plaisance.
Representative Vega, how are you?
Doing good. Good to see you, Mike.
The city of Holyoke is transitioning to a middle school system, and in doing that, there's a proposal to have the city build 2 new middle schools of anywhere from like $110 to $120 million. Now, talking about education, you have to talk about spending. And talking about education in Holyoke, it's almost impossible to avoid talking about spending because it's such a poor city. One of the proposals is to have a debt exclusion override to fund this. What's your position on that?
So, to answer the question directly, I'm in favor of the project. Obviously, a debt exclusion override is not my first choice, but given where the city's at financially, we can't bond for it as a city, so it's really the only option. And we're not the only city that does this. And even though we tend to be always talking about ourselves being a poor city, I want to talk about the opportunities that we're doing and the transformation that's going on. And in order to really have our school system capitalize on the changes going on, we've got to go to the middle school model again. It was the only thing that was almost universally agreed upon in every turnaround meeting for the last 5 years. So East Hampton just did it, they got passed. Lynn just tried to do an override, it didn't pass. And now they're stuck at what they're going to do in Lynn. So when we look at businesses, when we look at home ownership, when we look at people moving to Holyoke, one of the biggest things they look at is what our school system's like. And quite frankly, the press on the school systems and the reality of the school systems for the last 20 years hasn't been great. Good things are happening now. I think a lot of movements happened in the last 5 years, a little bit before receivership and now with receivership. And this is sort of the culmination of the turnaround plan to create and go back to a middle school model. And some people say, well, you want to go backwards, well, why not just use the buildings? One of the biggest issues and another factor in the fact that we're in receivership is that we've neglected our buildings for decades. The last new building built in Holyoke was Dean Tech, and we've done repairs. And in fact, when I was on the city council, we've been fiduciarily smart and responsible, I would say, when we rehabbed this very building and Dean Tech. Instead of building a new high school then, we saved lots of money and looked at those two buildings that were in good shape. But quite frankly, our buildings right now, 3 or 4 of them, are questionable whether we should even be using them now. And the Mass School Building Authority did a review of all of our buildings and came up with the fact that 3 or 4 of these buildings need to be taken offline. So it's an opportunity. I look at this as an opportunity to solidify a real turnaround plan, an opportunity to make sure that those parents that are re-engaging in our public schools, that they want to stay. Those things like dual language programs and more independence on those programs. The academies now at the high school, more choice, more independent learning for their students, a real opportunity to take dual enrollment at the college. So this is part of it, and you're right, this is the costly part. And the issue that I think people get upset about is that the state in the program we have reimburses 80% of the costs.
Well, let's talk about that, because it would be $40 million for the residents of Holyoke to pay back over what, a 30-year period?
30-year period, yeah.
And so it's counting on the population of Holyoke remaining what it is now, or is it projecting that there'll be, say, 5,000 more residents? How is that working? And I think Matt Safransky also has a question.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing I would just add to that is the topic is both education and transparency. What is your role as a state rep in working with the MSBA to get Holyoke the best, I don't want to say deal necessarily, but the most out of the Massachusetts School Building Authority for the benefit of the taxpayers and, of course, the students themselves?
Well, I've testified in front of the MSBA, worked with them when they were here. The reality is that as far as advocating, we're already an 80% community. So we are getting the best deal that's out there. That 80%, though, is based on a square footage number from about 15 years ago. So the MSBA has not increased their square footage cost number, and the reality of what it costs now to build a school is higher than that. So when all is said and done, also including some things that we don't reimburse for, we, the state, the MSBA, it turns out to be about a 63% reimbursement of the overall cost. So it ends up being about $40 million on the taxpayers over 30 years. But if you look at when it's broken down to each homeowner, the investment, it's not that huge of a number.
Are you going to say it's a cup of coffee a day?
No, it's not. I would, but I don't drink coffee. So,
Chai.
I think that the issue is that the business community is going to get hit harder, but they're also wanting educated people. They want people to be coming to work for them. So it's do you pay now or do you pay later? I think that having a good school system is going to draw in more businesses and it's going to draw in people. And I think what was your middle school experience like? You were in the K-8 model. Where'd you go for K-8?
I came just the last year.
You came just the last year. Okay. So our K-8 students are not getting a different experience when they get to middle school. And we need the technology, we need the opportunity, we need the infrastructure that should be there for middle school, and it's not there. And you go to some of our schools now. You go to Kelly and you go to Morgan. Those buildings were never made for 7th and 8th graders, never mind 6th graders.
What does that mean when you say the buildings were never made for 7th?
Size-wise, you go to locker rooms, you go to the bathrooms. They were built as elementary schools.
Smaller classes?
Smaller people. Just in general, you go to, there's not enough locker rooms, there's not enough locker sizes, the classrooms are small. And so, and education's changed, right? I mean, you talk to the teachers today, they want flexible space, right? We're no longer in the teachers at the front and rows, they want spaces that are movable. They want, the business community and the teachers want to have co-work spaces. They want to have project-based spaces, right? This is how education's moving, and if we don't keep up with that, we're going to fall even farther behind.
Manuel Frau Ramos, you have a question?
Yeah. Saludos.
Saludos. Good to see you.
Changing the topic a little to the human side. No building, no money. As you're aware, 20 years ago or 30 years ago, there was a lot of Puerto Rican Latinx faculty of teacher, paraprofessional, the system. Right now, it's probably 1/4 of the total teacher force in the Holyoke public system. What is going on?
At best. So, I don't want to speak on what's gone on, why we're there. I mean, I think, we can talk about institutional racism.
Why are we there?
Well, I think a couple of things.
They left.
Institutional racism for sure is a factor. I also think that, we did not have a lot of Latinos going into education. So, I mean, so it's on both sides, right? So you don't have a large number of Latinos graduating high school and say, I want to go into education. Whether it's because they had a bad experience in education, right? Because a lot of times many people get into education, they were inspired by some teacher, right? And that's what made them want to get into education. So you had an entire community for decades sort of being shut out of an educational experience here. But what we're doing now is partnering with, say, Westfield State and other colleges to target those students that want to become teachers and work with them at 10th grade and 9th grade and 11th grade and get them a pathway to do dual enrollment classes, to get their teacher certification straight out of high school into Westfield State, and then that the high school will be saying, we have a job for you when you come back. Everybody, again, with the turnaround team and everybody is on board, we want more of a reflective faculty that's teaching our students. And so that would put us at about a 50% Latino to student ratio.
Faculty and principals and directors and staff all across.
And again, absolutely, but again, there's movement now, but there hasn't been a large number of people going into that track, if you will, that field, from Holyoke. For sure, and from Springfield. Springfield's doing the same thing with Westfield. They have this community pact to work with them to get teachers again. Look at Springfield. How many African-American teachers are there? How many Latino teachers? So this is again, definitely prominent in Holyoke and in Springfield and other areas, but again, we're not alone in this. And this is definitely something that, we have not kept up with, nationally probably.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to reserve my opinion for another time. Michael Ortiz, you have a question?
Yes. Can you please tell us a little bit about some projects related to the Holyoke schools that you're currently working on?
Sure. Well, other than obviously the middle school project, which I think is critically important, I'm the lead with the great colleague of mine, Mary Keefe out of Worcester, to really look at how schools are funded. It's called Chapter 70. And Chapter 70 and education reform in Massachusetts was done in 1993. Great things were done. We were leaders on this. It wasn't because the state necessarily wanted to. We were being sued by the fact that we weren't doing what we needed to do, and we're kind of back at that point again, unfortunately, in history. So for 25 years, this formula has been in place, hasn't really been updated, and so we are looking at two things. One, updating the formula, which the two big things for Holyoke would be how we properly count students in poverty. That's a huge one. And another one would be our special needs population, which again, we are underfunded. In the current formula, it sort of takes these assumptions. We're going to assume that 15% of your population has special needs, and we're going to fund it at that. When you have a district like Holyoke that has 26% special needs, you have a huge gap. And so communities would have a choice on how they want to count disadvantaged students. Again, instead of going for this sort of swath of an assumption, really counting who's living where, what's their poverty line like.
State Representative, is that the bill called Cherish that State Senator Joe Comerford is putting forward?
That's the higher ed bill. This one's called the Promise Act. This one is K-12 education. So the Promise Act is K-12. The Cherish Act is higher ed. So there's a theme going on here. What we're looking at is the fact that in our Constitution and in everything that we care about, education is there. And so we have not kept up with the demands.
How close is the Promise Act to getting approved or?
So the recommendations for the core recommendations of the changes to the formula are now almost 4 years old. There was a bipartisan independent group that went across the state and took in recommendations and then compiled those recommendations. And those recommendations actually came out of the out of the Education Committee last session in full. The Senate passed it fully. The House passed it with some amendments, some changes to how we were going to deal with some of the low-income stuff. I was optimistically hopeful that it would get done, but it didn't pass. So I think that there's big momentum. I mean, we have the governor saying he wants to look at the formula. The House of Representatives and the Speaker has, continually tried to put more money into education. I think they're committed to looking at the formula. You had the Minority Leader, Brad Jones, on the inauguration day, almost spent 2 minutes of his inauguration speech talking about school funding. So everyone's on board with doing something. We might not all be on the same page of what we're going to do, but I think it is, I think it's going to pass. Again, the second part is the money. You can change the formula, how you're going to cut the pie up, if you will, but you got to make a bigger pie.
Can you explain, like, does it have to be refiled, the promise bill?
Yes. So
You have to go through the whole
We're going through the whole process.
filing?
So it's been filed. Yes, filing deadline is tomorrow for all bills for the legislature for the 191st session. And then we have 2 weeks of co-sponsoring. So yes, December 31st, everything restarts, or January 1st, I guess. So everything from last session is basically gone. So everything restarts. Most chairs will take up stuff that passed last session, take it up early in the session to try to give it, a little bit more of a runway to get done. So yes, we filed it, co-sponsorship the next 2 weeks. We get committee assignments next month. Hopefully that bill will get heard soon, along with a bunch of other education bills. And again, keep in mind, this is the basic formula, everyone should get a fair shot, right? It's the basics. But you have everything else. We have charter school reimbursement, which is a huge issue. You got regional transportation, which is a huge issue. Busing. I'm still amazed at how many communities in this Commonwealth charge families for their high school students to take a bus to school. Can you imagine getting a bill for $500 to say, okay, welcome to high school, welcome to Holyoke. You got to pay us $500 to take the bus.
That
That's
leads,
happening
that leads
in
to
lots of
another
communities.
issue. You recently wrote a column about students, if their parents can't pay for their lunch, their food is taken away from them, tossed aside, and then here's a cheese sandwich.
Thankfully not in Holyoke, but yeah, so food shaming. Food's another, so I'm in the lead on Breakfast After the Bell. My colleague Rep. Vargas out of Haverhill is co-filing that with me. We're also working on food shaming. And unfortunately, I think most superintendents, most principals want to feed our kids. It just costs money again. The Breakfast After the Bell participation rates, there's federal reimbursement money, even despite what's going on federally, there's money coming in for those programs. But again, those items like busing and food cost our districts money, but the food shaming, we're trying to move away from, oh, this student's on a reduced lunch and this student can pay full. This doesn't matter, in my opinion. If I'm sending my kid to school, if anyone's sending their kids to public school, and they're here for 6 to 8 hours a day, they should be fed. We feed our prisoners as well we should, right? But why are we not feeding our students?
Yeah, why aren't we feeding our students?
It comes
Who came
down-
up with that idea that you have to pay for it, and if your parent couldn't pay for it, you're not going to have a good meal at school?
I think
Who
it's-
was the brain behind that? Matt, you have a question?
Well, I just want to switch gears to slightly. It was in the news recently that a committee that had been set up to look at some of the transparency of since the reform of the Public Records Act went through, I believe, just a little about 2.5 years ago. It had expired. Regardless of the fate of that panel itself, are there any things in terms of open government, whether it's open meeting, public records, just general transparency that you think the legislature is going to be taking a look at this session?
I think we're definitely going to be taking a look at it. I think, the public records issue, obviously, personally, I feel the way most people do, I'm elected, so whatever I do should be public record. My vote should be public record. I think that, as you know, the Massachusetts legislature website, I think 3 years ago got an F, for transparency. We were doing better. I have no problem. Committee vote should be public. If we're voting on bills, that should be more public. As you know, we don't often vote on lots of bills. Unfortunately, there's not lots of debate, and lots of bills get put to these omnibus bills. So instead of 10 or 15 votes, it ends up being one vote. So as far as our work and what we're doing in Boston, I think that should definitely be accessible. Why the Secretary of State and other offices and the governor is pushing against public records, I don't know. It feels to me like that request should be very simple and straightforward, especially in today's age with this technology.
Would you file a bill to make the legislature subject to the open meeting law, legislature and the governor's office? Currently, any legislative committee and anybody in the governor's office can meet behind closed doors at will, outside of the taxpayers who fund them's view. Would you support putting them under the open meeting law?
I would support the concept. I think you're always going to be able to, you got to remember, you're always going to be able to have an executive session, right? So, there's always, often when I'm on committees, we'll vote publicly, we'll have the precedent, and then we go into executive session to talk about other things. So I think that...
What do you talk about in those executive sessions that it has to be behind closed doors? Are you talking about people is specifically the job that they're doing? Is that why you're going into executive session?
It might just be a more, I mean, so the committee work is an interesting situation. Right? So we don't all like get together and talk. I mean, there's the committee chair and the vice chair, and they drive the agenda. There's not often time for us, the members of the committee, to actually talk with each other about how we feel about things. So sometimes the executive session might be, oh, can we talk about how we feel about this bill? Sometimes if it's dealing with legal issues, especially on the city councils, but even at our level, if we're having someone come in who needs to testify but has some sensitive information that may address the department or an individual, we don't want that public. We could go into executive session.
Representatives, does this mean that lawmakers in general don't have time to talk just in the hallway or over the phone or text about
We're always talking in the hallway,
bills?
but when you have all 50, see, I think it depends on the committee, right? I mean, so if you're on a committee, so I'm on the Children and Families Committee, and you've got a 4-hour hearing, right? We sort of try to yield our time, if you will, to make sure that the advocates and individuals that have traveled across the state to come and speak to us. They don't want to listen to a bunch of legislators talk for an hour, right? Because they've come to testify. So we want to make sure that we give them that time to testify. So to get all 15 of us together in the hallway, so to speak, for the water cooler talk, that just doesn't happen. I can talk to them individually, you and I, we're talking about, absolutely, if we're on that committee. So I think that the question is going to continue. And I was on the city council when the open meeting law got passed. And of course, it's a great line for a joke of the legislature passes laws that they don't have to abide by, right? So it doesn't look good. The optics don't look good. And there are other people much more well-versed in this than I. Unfortunately, 2 of them are no longer with us. One passed away. Representative Kokot was a lead on this stuff, and Representative Kulik was also a lead, and he is retired. So, but there's a lot of advocacy groups out there that want more transparency. So whether that means open meeting law or whether that means more information being disseminated of what we do and votes, I think that there's ways that we want to be more transparent. I think that the Treasurer's Office over the years has done a good job with the open checkbook. So if you've got extra time on your hands, you can go in and see where your dollars are being spent. It's very open as where the money's going. It takes a little bit of time to research through it.
Did the representative answer your question?
Yes and no.
That's what I think too. Yes and no.
What about in terms of public records? Because right now Massachusetts is one of 2 states, along with Michigan, where the governor's office is essentially exempt from public records.
I support that they should not be exempt from public records. And I've never been presented with an argument as to why they should be exempt. So I'm someone who like an issue like this, I'm the kind of guy that says, okay, so I've got this group that says they want to have open meeting law, this legislature abide by open meeting law. I want to get the person that says why we shouldn't be and get us into a room so I can understand it more.
We should note, Aaron is atypical. He was, most legislators probably don't want the open meeting law to be applied to them. Aaron is atypical in that, I think he supports transparency. I've known him since before he was on the city council, but the fact remains, a lot of the decision, and you can, frame it however you want. We have to go into executive session for whatever. I personally think that there are too many exemptions that boards can use to go into executive session. Let's face it, when you get into executive session, a lot more gets discussed than just that particular issue. And that, I think, is where the problem is, because taxpayers are paying for all the things that these decisions apply to, and they're not always available to know how these decisions were made, and
I think
can you address that in a minute, and then we're going to take a break?
Part of the reasons why I think that myself and others are atypical of this is we don't also know sometimes as legislators what's going on, right? So, as you know, there's hundreds of thousands of bills being filed, hundreds of decisions being made. You can't be part of every decision. You try to get yourself at the table for the ones you care about, education, things that I care about. I try to get myself at the table, but things are moving and things are happening, and we're not always privy, so there's frustration on our end as well.
Sounds like a horse race. We're going to take a break, and we're going to come back with State Representative Aaron Vega.
Strive for less than 5 days absent.
Why is it important to go to school every day?
You can learn and have fun.
Strive for less than 5.
Oh, gee, the bat signal. Dr. Strike is calling. Let's go.
I know Holyoke Public School students love a challenge. And this year I'm issuing a challenge to all our students to miss no more than 5 days of school this year.
Strive for 5. No more than 5 absences. Strive for less than 5 days absent.
Strive for less than 5.
And for students that miss no more than 5 days, we're going to have prizes, incentives, and celebrations for anybody who's on track to meet this goal.
I'm gonna strive for less than 5. How about you?
Ven para escuela. I'm Ashley.
And I'm Shania, and we're from Donahue School.
And we're 8th graders.
We're
gonna strive for less than 5. How about you?
Strive for less than 5.
Esmerarte por lograr menos de 5 asistencias escolares.
Strive for less than 5!
Recuérdense, no podemos perder más de 5 días de escuela en Holyoke este año.
This year, we are going to strive for less than 5 days absent.
We're going to strive for less than 5 days absent. We are striving for less than 5 days absent from school this year.
Strive for less than 5 days absent.
Our goal is to strive for less than 5 days absent, menos de 5 días de ausencia.
This school year, we want to strive for less than 5 days absent. Esmerarte por lograr menos de 5 ausencias escolares. Sí se puede.
This year, we are going to strive for less than 5 days absent.
This year, we're going to strive for less than 5 days absent.
Welcome to a new school year. This year, we are going to strive for less than 5 days absent. Esmerate por lograr menos de 5 ausencias escolares.
This year, we're going to strive for less than 5 days absent.
We come to school to learn and have fun. Vamos a la escuela todos los días para aprender. Yo vengo para la escuela todos los días. ¿Y tú?
We're back and we're speaking with Representative Erin Vega. We're at the Holyoke High School. Thank you, Holyoke High School. And we're talking about education and other issues. When we went to break, Representative, you were talking about that it's really difficult to get your bills out in front because you said there were thousands. Are there really thousands?
No,
or
there's 5,000 to 6,000 bills filed every session.
In Massachusetts?
By 200 people.
Wow. What's going on? I mean, and that's normal.
Yeah, because you have 160 reps and 40 senators, and we have our own ideas that we want to change. We hear from a lot of advocacy groups, and so yes, you have people that want to change the law, get rid of laws, add new laws, strengthen laws, take away laws. I mean, so it's a whole gamut of what people want to do.
How do you negotiate that in the legislature? Somebody comes to you with an idea, you agree with it, you want to move it forward. Is it based on the strength of your networking? Is it that Speaker DeLeo also happens to agree with whatever the issue is? How do you move that forward?
Yes to both of those.
Okay, we're done. Thank you.
Yes, and I mean, any new idea, it's very hard to get a new idea done in one session. So yeah, it is networking, it's getting more people on board. If it's an issue that's going to affect everybody or many communities, I mean, obviously, you have built-in networks, right? So there's a Gateway Cities Caucus, right? So everyone who comes from a gateway city in Massachusetts, right? So that gets
Holyoke, it's Lawrence.
Holyoke, Lawrence, New Bedford, Brockton, so Chicopee, Westfield, I think is a gateway city, Pittsfield. So that's a built-in network, right? Then of course you have like the Progressive Caucus, right? So that they're going to be more, they're going to have a network of people who want to push more progressive ideas. There's the Black and Latino Caucus. There's the Women's Caucus. So those are the kind of where you build those networks. And then yes, I've got a bill on supported decision-making for people with disabilities instead of going into guardianship.
Yeah, what is that?
So supported decision-making is so when someone turns 22 and they age out of the benefits and out of the system, often families have no real opportunity or real other choice but to put their loved one in guardianship, which basically takes away all their rights. And that's not necessarily the right thing to do. This is a program that is being done, piloted, and it's also passed in other states where an individual can create a panel. This could be my decision-making group, right? So you're an expert in healthcare, you're my caseworker for the last 10 years, you're an expert on housing, you're a good financial person, and you're my friend in social activities. And so when I have decisions to make around health, around banking, around where I go to live, it's done collectively. The family members can be part of that group, but it's instead of guardianship. So that's a new bill. And so I'm trying to build some coalition around that. I've got a great co-sponsor on that, Paul Tucker, really great guy. And so we've got to then network to our individuals and our colleagues, I should say, to tell them about how good this bill is.
And when does it get to the speaker?
Well, first it goes through the process. So first it has a hearing, and then I work with that chairman to get it out of that committee, to get it passed out of the committee. Like it's just a bill and the whole process, right? So then it gets out of committee, and then those conversations start with leadership, and again, understanding where the speaker has a real tendency to support children, real tendency to support those people with special needs, to support fringe individuals, like with the stuff we've done on LGBT rights and transgender rights. So this might be in his wheelhouse. It's not on his radar right now, right? I mean, he's got 100 other things going on, so it's my job and Rep. Tucker's job over the next 6 to 8 to 10 months to try to get it on his radar and get it, hopefully if the chair agrees with it, that person will help us as well.
Michael Ortiz, you have a question?
Yeah. How are you helping the expansion of arts programming in Holyoke?
Oh, that's a great question. So we're lucky, we talk about a $41 billion budget at the state level. That's a lot of money in my world. But a lot of that money obviously is going to, DTA and DCF and big things that have to be paid for, roads and bridges and schools. But we're one of those states that actually puts money into arts. We have the Mass Cultural Council, which every year we try to find more money into. I think it was 16 or 17 million that got into that line item. And the Mass Cultural Council then disseminates grants back out to our communities, where they give our local communities money, and then on top of that, they also do grants.
In fact, Representative, Massachusetts is the only state that funds cultural councils in every municipality in the Commonwealth.
So we do some good things. And then we have Mass Creative, which is another organization that actually really is on the ground, working with individuals and working with organizations, I should say, in schools to promote arts. Secondly, I would say locally, I'm working really close with Enchanted Circle Theater, which hopefully you've encountered in your classes, and if not, you will hopefully soon. Enchanted Circle Theater is looking at how we integrate arts into education. So it's not just, go take an art class and then go take your math class and go take English class. It's how do you do an art class that's integrated into math and to your math and English classes. Not only that, what they want to do is then take the teachers that are math teachers, geography teachers, English teachers, and give them training in arts so they can incorporate themselves. So if we can work with Enchanted Circle Theater and other groups like that to really incorporate arts, everyone will be getting arts, because I know that, right, when schools are making budget cuts, the first thing that goes, art programs and music programs. Thankfully, in Holyoke, we're trying to do that. We're trying not to do that so much. I think we're trying to recover from the cuts. So I think it's about funding those state-level organizations, and like Mass Cultural Council and Mass Creative, but also making sure that the local organizations that are doing work on the ground, especially right now in our schools, to make sure they're supported.
Representative, obviously one of the big cultural venues here in Holyoke that's been getting a lot of attention is the Victory Theater. Mm-hmm. Has the legislature been doing anything on that? Have you been doing anything on that in any of the bonding bills or earmarks in the budget?
So we've got earmarks in the budget we haven't done, because earmarks in the budget likes to be money that's going to be spent down. Earmarks in the budget isn't something like, okay, they're going to put this in the bank and let it build up. Bond money is, and tax credits are. So we did get, a good chunk of money in the bond, the last bond bill, and we're hoping that in working with the new Secretary of Economic Development and Housing, we bring him out here, and hopefully they can see the Victory Theater project. Governor Baker has, we've talked to him a bit about it. This administration, and even at the end of Deval Patrick's administration, they were moving away from investing in theaters. I mean, you have the Hanover Theater they invest in. They have a couple. It's the theater in Pittsfield. I'm forgetting the
Colonial.
Name. The one?
Is it the Colonial?
I think it might be the Colonial, right? So there's been state money, and they sort of moved away from that. And I think the Victory was kind of late in the game. But we do have bond money sitting there. As you know, bond money is not real money. We've got to get the governor to release it. So we've got to convince the secretary that this is a worthy project. And I think what's great about the Victory Theater project is it's not just a standalone theater, right? It's about how do we make sure that, Holyoke High students are performing there and learning there? How do we make sure that the students that are in the track for arts are getting the experience to intern and learn lighting and learn costumes and do all that other stuff. I mean, to have a theater like that in this town could be such an asset both to our public schools and to the college. about getting those opportunities. Having a group from Boston or New York do residency here, right, as they workshop a play or a musical and have these students be able to participate could be a huge opportunity for us.
Representative Vega, let's go back to the one topic that we know very well, bilingual education. And as you know, in 2003, English only came to town. Basically, it was a failure, educational policy, and bilingual education with another name is coming back. What is the difference between then and now?
Well, let's also remember that that vote was put out as a ballot question. So it wasn't the legislature doing it on their own. I'm not saying that they would or wouldn't have done it, I wasn't there. What's changed, I think that a better recognition of the importance of other cultures and other languages, the recognition perhaps by some that these communities are staying here, are now part of the fabric of our community. I think maybe 20 years ago there was some pushback, obviously. And you know, I think about that bill in particular that's bringing back bilingual education. You know, I think about people like Rep. Cabral from New Bedford and then Rep. Sanchez, who's no longer with us, but they've been working on that. You know, Rep. Cabral has been working on that since that vote happened, you know, trying every session to get it changed. I think it's the influx of dual language programs across the Commonwealth, including Holyoke, and how that's attracting more people to come into the back into the public schools. So it's like, oh, this is actually something we should be doing. I think also the fact that our economy is more global and people should be learning other languages and other cultures. I think that maybe we were sort of, again, denying that maybe 20 years ago, or not actually recognizing that. I mean, 20 years in some ways sounds like a long time, in some ways it's not. But think about how much has changed in 20 years, right? We all have this device in our pocket that we did not have 20 years ago, right? That's changed everything. The cell phone has just changed everything. And so, again, it's about pushing. How do you get something done? Just continually pushing and pushing and pushing and getting more and more people on board. And I think that, you know, if you look at the legislature 20 years ago, you know, I think it's changed in lots of ways as well. You know, the Senate, unfortunately at this point, not so much as far as Latinos. There's only one Latino and no African Americans, but, you know, in the House, now for the first time, we have the highest number of women elected. And that's a great thing. We have probably the highest number of Latinos and blacks in the House at this point than we've had. So that changes the conversation. So it's people's temperature on the issue, but also the legislature changing as well. And, you know, being, you know, this is maybe too far, I would argue, away from a vote like that, right? So when the people vote on an issue, the legislature is fearful of changing that. They don't want to go against the people. And I think the more recent one you see is the death with dignity. So was it 6 years ago or 7 years ago, there was a vote by the people, they voted against it, barely. The law's been changed, new legislators have come in, that bill has some new life, people are talking about it in a different way, there's been some adjustments to it, but again, temperature changes, ideas change, and I would say that, you know, we have a hard time keeping up, right? We just passed an Airbnb bill, right? We just passed, you know, privacy acts on cell phones and your information. Look what happened federally on everyone's credit information being taken out, you know, because legislatures don't keep up with technology fast enough, right? We want to regulate it, but we don't want to stifle it. You know, so I think there's combinations of that. So those are examples, but I think the time was right, finally, to get bilingual education back.
And then how about for Medicare for All, what's being known as Medicare for All? Your colleagues, State Representative Lindsay Zabadosa, is taking the lead. When I read that story, she said she was very happy to do it, but it almost seems like everybody was saying, yeah, go ahead, Lindsay. You go, girl.
You go. I support the concept. The reality is the devil's in the details, and how does that actually happen, right? And so, you know, what does that mean? Are we expanding mass health? Are we expanding GIC? Are we letting more people in GIC, the government health program? What does it actually look like? I mean, so the thing that I really supported last session was to do, which should have been happening this year if the healthcare bill passed, but the healthcare bill didn't pass either, would be to do a modeling study, right? So we know that mass health right now, in that $41 billion budget, like 28% of that, $28 billion of that is healthcare. 20 billion being just mass health, right? So we know how much it costs us every year, right? We have every program being evaluated. We know, I get reports every other week on what's the cost containment and what's costing us more. The idea was to run a model, create a Medicare for All model, and run it parallel, and say what would it have cost us? It's interesting to me because almost the number one complaint or concern you hear from businesses is the cost of healthcare. The second one is finding qualified workers. This could help businesses. If suddenly they didn't have to pay for healthcare, it seems like it could help businesses. Again, that's a rough 3,000-foot view. The devil's in the details.
Representative, interesting you mentioned Medicaid, we talk about it as Medicare for all,
yeah.
But I mean, Medicare is a federal program, of course. Would it be, if Massachusetts was going out on its own to create universal health care, wouldn't it be more like a Medicaid for all as opposed to Medicare for all?
It would be much more like a Medicare, exactly. And I think that's the question of, what does it mean for Massachusetts to go on its own? How does it affect the person, especially out here, or in the Berkshires, who maybe works in New York or works in Connecticut? So what's their health care situation going to be? What kind of penalties and fines that we're putting on people to not have health care? Health care is like the Megillah issue, as you know. I mean, I'm out there trying to fight for price variance, protect our community hospitals. We want to get more coverage to young people. We're trying to make sure that those people on Mass Health have dental care, right? So we're fighting all this within the system. And then there's the idea, do we blow the whole system up and have a new system, right? And so, you're fighting kind of on two fronts, if you will, right? Fix the current system, but is there a different way? And again, for a legislature, 200 people to come around reinventing a whole system. I mean, they did it under Romney to have mass health, healthcare for all in Massachusetts to a degree. It's not easy to have 200 people agree upon something that's going to fundamentally change the insurance industry and fundamentally change the business industry, so it's an uphill battle, but if we had that data, it would be helpful.
Thank you, Matt Safransky, founder and editor of Western Mass Politics and Insight, and thank you, Michael Ortiz, who just arrived about a year ago from where in Puerto Rico? ¿Dónde? Carolina. Thank you, Mike Plaisance and Manuel Ferrao Ramos. We're going to be coming back with this program called The Politicos.